This week, we are missing the number 4, 5, and 7 tight ends in fantasy football. And if you've had one of these guys on your team, more than likely you really haven't had a reliable backup because you haven't needed one. So the question is, are you going to be able to find somebody out there that's going to help replace those points in week 9? Well, I've got good news and I've got bad news. The good news is I'm here to try and help you solve that problem. The bad news is I'm also here to tell you you're Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? We are missing some really important pieces this week at the tight end position. Sam Laporta, George Kittle, Evan Ingram, all three of these guys on their bye weeks. And unfortunately, the matchups this week don't have a ton of opportunity for any safety if you're looking to pick up somebody to play in their spot. But I'm going to be going through every single matchup for week 9, and we're going to try and pinpoint maybe a couple of guys that you could use a waiver wire pick on, or maybe even grab off free agency if your waivers have already run, and put them in your lineup and not get a 0. But unfortunately, it doesn't look great this week. There are not a ton of matchups, and honestly, when we go through some of these matchups, there's a few of them where there's not going to be a whole lot to say. So make sure you buckle in, ladies and gentlemen, because if you need help at tight end this week, you're definitely going to need to be doing your homework. Thursday Night Football is going to bring a tough matchup for any tight end. The Titans allow the 3rd fewest fantasy points to the position. The Steelers allow the 5th fewest fantasy points to the position. And unfortunately, with Pat Freiermuth out another week, we don't have any reliable options in this game. I will say it's going to be very interesting to see how these guys are utilized, though. For my boy Chiggy Oko, the question is going to be about Will Levis at quarterback. Chiggy Oko saw 6 targets last week, the second most that he has seen in a game so far this year. Does that trend continue? We know Will Levis has the big arm, but can he be consistent enough in the intermediate part of the field to give Chiggy Oko some fantasy value? And by the way, with Will Levis, we're being really cautious with him. Last week, Atlanta caused no pressure on Will Levis, and really that helped him find DeAndre Hopkins wide open down the field. I highly doubt the Steelers are going to let him get that comfortable in the pocket this week. So is he going to have to dump it off a few more times? Chiggy Oko is a super high risk play, but he's definitely a guy that I might take a look at if I'm looking for some potential upside, even if I know the floor is not safe at all. Connor Heyward was going to be an interesting one as well. He did get 6 targets last week, and with Kenny Pickett being banged up right now, the thought would be let's get the ball out fast and quick so we don't have Kenny Pickett laying on his back the entire game. They don't want to risk any further injury with him. But Deontay Johnson is liable to see so many targets, I don't know if Heyward has a whole lot of upside. And given how tough of a matchup this can be because the Titans haven't allowed a ton of fantasy points to tight ends this year, I really feel like we should be looking elsewhere. For Miami and Kansas City, we know that Miami doesn't use the tight end position, so we really only need to talk about Travis Kelce. And we know the Kansas City Chiefs are coming off an absolutely horrid game last week going up against Denver. Now, for whatever reason they played bad, you have to anticipate that they are going to put that behind them and they are going to be ready to go against Miami. Now, the good thing here is that, number one, going up against Miami, there's going to be plenty of opportunities to throw the football. This is probably going to be a high-scoring game. And considering Miami has allowed the 9th most fantasy points to the tight end position, it's almost likely that Travis Kelce will have a huge bounce-back performance in your lineup. The real question is, how high will his ceiling go? Well, we'll find out if Taylor Swift ends up attending the game. For Minnesota and Atlanta, there is a possibility that we're going to see 2 new starting quarterbacks in this game. For Minnesota, after the Kirk Cousins injury, they did go out and they did trade for Joshua Dobbs from Atlanta, but it's Jaren Hall that will be the starter this week, the rookie out of BYU. And while Atlanta's defense has been pretty good this season, they do allow a considerable amount of points to the tight end position. And it's almost willing to bet at this point that Jaren Hall is going to be looking towards his safety blanket, TJ Hockenson, more times than not. But the question really is going to be, how high is the ceiling for TJ Hockenson this week? Because the dude could see 10, 11, 12 targets, which is great, but how many of them are going to be catchable? And if he does catch them, how big are those plays going to be? Really, for me, I don't think he has a whole lot of touchdown upside. So the high-end tight end 1 status that we've seen from him all year may not be here this week. If he gets in the area of 6 to 10 targets and he catches anywhere from 6 to 8 of those, he definitely could give you 60 to 80 yards. And at that point, he would find himself right in the middle of tight end 1 status, or maybe even a little bit lower. I just don't see a whole lot of big plays for Hockenson this week, even though the target should be there. Literally, as I was getting ready to record this segment, Atlanta announced that Taylor Heinicke will be taking over as the starting quarterback for this week against Minnesota. And honestly, this is actually a little bit of a boost in my opinion. Desmond Ridder, he has shown some glimpses this year, but he hasn't been consistent enough. And as far as Taylor Heinicke goes, we have seen him be fantasy relevant while in Washington. And now at this point, he has even better weapons around him. But for the sake of this video, we have to discuss what does it mean for Jonnu Smith and Kyle Pitts. Back in 2021, when Taylor Heinicke started 15 games for Washington, their leading tight end was Ricky Seals-Jones, and he only saw 49 targets that season. He was 5th on the team in targets. They did have some injuries to Logan Thomas, but when you take a look at what Taylor Heinicke has done over the course of his couple of years as a starter in Washington, he really never utilized the tight end position. Even towards the end of 2022, when he started several games for them, he barely looked Logan Thomas's way. There was nothing consistent with those performances. So I really don't know what we're going to get from Jonnu Smith or Kyle Pitts. Now, there is one thing that I can say for certain based on the numbers that we saw from Taylor Heinicke while he was in Washington. He loves to target his number 1 wide receiver, and he loves to target his running backs, which means the major targets are probably going to go to Drake London and then Bijan Robinson. If you have to look towards Kyle Pitts or Jonnu Smith this week, both of them are going to bring the same type of risk that they have all season long. Kyle Pitts will continue to have the upside as more of the big playmaker, and Jonnu Smith will tend to be a little bit safer given the target share that we've seen from him so far this year. If I had to put my finger on it though, and you said, Kyle, which one do you think would have the better week? I would probably lean towards Kyle Pitts, given Taylor Heinicke's track record of not really targeting his tight ends. For Seattle and Baltimore, we really only need to talk about Mark Andrews, and he continues to be a consistent fantasy option for us in this new look offense where the Ravens are looking to pass the ball way more often. Now, the one thing I will say that I've kind of seen this year is that Mark Andrews isn't really the big field stretcher that he was in the past. Those huge plays that we used to see from him don't seem to be there as much anymore. But that's not really a big deal because he's still seeing a decent amount of volume, and then when you get to the red zone, you know he's being looked for. 6 touchdowns already this season. So when you start Mark Andrews, you get a pretty safe floor every single week. He doesn't have the big playability, so his ceiling isn't as high as it used to be. And for him to be able to reach that ceiling, he's got to score a touchdown. But he's the tight end 2 in football right now, and he's absolutely in your lineup every week. The number 1 and 2 ranked defenses against tight ends this year. The Browns have allowed the fewest fantasy points to the position. The Cardinals have allowed the second fewest fantasy points to the position. But we also have 2 of our most interesting options this week in this game. For Trey McBride, he is a very popular waiver wire target this week after getting 14 targets in his game last week. That is the most targets that any tight end has had in a game so far this season. But the biggest thing is, Joshua Dobbs isn't the quarterback in Arizona anymore. It's going to be rookie Clayton Tune because Kyler Murray still is not able to go yet. So how is that going to look for Trey McBride? Well, in this analysis, it's going to be a whole lot of hopes and wishes because I don't have any definitive analysis to say, yep, this is going to happen. But here's kind of my gut feeling. Clayton Tune, his first game, he's going to be looking to get rid of the ball quickly. And more than likely, him and Trey McBride have spent a little bit of time together because Clayton Tune, if he was working as the backup quarterback, was probably working with the second team offense, which would have included Trey McBride for a majority of this season. So if that's been happening, more than likely, they may have a little bit of a connection working together a little bit more often than what he did with Zach Ertz. So my hope is that Trey McBride, while 14 15 targets probably is not in the equation again, can definitely see around 6 to 8 targets. Now, moving the football may not be as easy as we would like, especially against this Cleveland Browns defense. So I'm not looking for some huge numbers from Trey McBride, but if we can get some dink and dunk passes and get the ball out quickly to him, and if he can give us 6 catches for 40 yards, that's still more than a lot of what other tight ends will offer this week. Now, Arizona may allow the second fewest fantasy points to the tight end position, but I'm not drawing too many conclusions just from that number, because this defense still allows a lot of yards and a lot of points to opposing offenses. But David Njoku's usage over the last few weeks is definitely something that's got me excited. Over the first 3 weeks of the season, David Njoku was averaging just under 4 targets per game. But over the last 4 weeks, his targets per game have jumped to over 7. And back in week 6, he had 2 huge plays called back by holding penalties, one of which would have been like a 30-yard touchdown. And then in week 7, he had another huge play called back. Finally, last week in week 8, he was able to score a touchdown and put together a pretty decent performance. Now, as of right now, it doesn't sound like Deshaun Watson will start in week 9, which is actually a good thing for David Njoku because he's played better when Deshaun Watson hasn't been on the field. So you know what? In a week where we're dealing with so many issues at the tight end position, I'm going all in on David Njoku being a decent replacement for you. Now, if you don't have David Njoku, he probably wasn't on your waiver wire. So if he is for some reason, hopefully he's already been grabbed up. But at this point, given the tight end landscape for this week, I definitely think David Njoku could finish as one of the top performers for week 9. For the Rams and Packers, really, it's a lot of what ifs with their tight end position. Tyler Higbee coming off a season high 7 targets last week, but how do we know what's going to happen with him this week if Matthew Stafford won't be playing? And as of this recording, it had not been guaranteed yet whether or not Stafford would end up missing, even though it doesn't look good for him. And for Luke Musgrave, he's playing, he just isn't getting any targets. And this Green Bay offense is just all over the place. They have absolutely no consistency whatsoever. And unfortunately, neither of these guys have any consistency. And it's a lot of what do you want to risk if you want to play either of them this week. With Tyler Higbee, we're just going to have to wait until we know a little bit more information on whether or not Stafford is playing. Again, as I recorded this, there was no definitive answer on whether or not he would play. So for Higbee, you're risking a lot of upside at that point, because while he might get an okay amount of targets, Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp will probably lead the targets once again for the Rams. And for Luke Musgrave, you're playing him for a whole lot of upside, but absolutely no floor, because the guy's got big playability written all over him, but he doesn't see enough targets to really utilize any of that big playability. So if you try to start Luke Musgrave, you're going to be looking for like a big play, maybe here or there. But honestly, if you start him, you're hoping for 3 or 4 targets and that he catches all of them. Cade Otton will be the one guy that I take a look at this week as somebody available on your waiver wire to throw into your lineup and actually start. Because Cade Otton actually plays more snaps than any tight end in football right now. He's just not heavily utilized in the passing game, but going up against Houston this week could definitely help that out. Houston allows the 3rd most fantasy points to the position, and Cade Otton, if he's going to be on the field over 90% of the time, is definitely going to have an opportunity to take advantage of that. So while his ceiling isn't super high, neither is his floor, because if the guy gets only 2 targets this week, he's not going to do a whole lot for you. But if the Tampa Bay Bucks can get back on track and move the football, there is a hope that in the red zone, Cade Otton could end up scoring. So if there's somebody that you're wanting to risk it with this week, of all the risky options, Cade Otton is probably the least risky, if that makes sense to you. Because again, if he's on the field over 90% of the snaps, there's at least an opportunity for him to get more targets. Before last week, Dalton Schultz had 3 straight games with a touchdown. Now, during that time, they were beat up at the wide receiver position, though, with Tank Dell being out due to a concussion, and also Robert Woods missing time because of his foot. So what do we see moving forward as the wide receivers start to get a little bit more healthy? For me this week, Dalton Schultz brings a lot of touchdown upside. We're probably still going to see more targets going to Nico Collins and Tank Dell, but Dalton Schultz definitely could be in line for a potential top 10 week. Now, why don't I have him in green? Again, it's because Tank Dell is back. And now that Tank Dell is back, there's no guarantee that CJ Stroud is going to continue to look towards Dalton Schultz. Coming out of the bye, the hope was that Dalton Schultz would continue to see a decent target share and maybe some big playability for Houston. But given the matchup that he had, it's surprising that he didn't play a little bit better. He only caught 2 balls for 5 yards. Now, Carolina does do a decent job in the passing game. So this week going up against Tampa, who isn't nearly as tough in the passing game, we're going to hope that Dalton Schultz can get back on track. So if you're looking to risk it with Dalton Schultz this week, you're definitely hoping for some of that touchdown upside if Houston can get the ball into the red zone. Logan Thomas is one of the widest variable tight ends in the game right now because he either has a game where he gets you like 8 or 9 targets, or he has you a game where he gets you like 2 or 3 targets. We're really not finding any in between with Logan Thomas, which is really what we would like to do because his ups and his downs make it really difficult to try and start him on a weekly basis. Now, Logan Thomas does not have a ton of big playability. So when you look at what he does in the passing game, it really is about a safe floor if he can get more than 6 targets in a game. Because if he can do that, he's going to give you 50 or 60 yards more than likely. He's not going to snap off any big touchdowns, but if they can get in the red zone, he becomes one of their top red zone targets. So when you play Logan Thomas, you really just hope that he hits his floor. I'm not rooting for a ceiling with Logan Thomas. I really just want him to be consistent. If he can get the targets, he will be, but it just depends on if he's a part of the game plan that week. It's really sad to see how far the New England offense has fallen. Even from the beginning of this season, Mac Jones in this offense looked pretty darn good the first couple of weeks, and then all of a sudden it's like they can't figure anything out. Mac Jones is trying too hard and he has too many stupid turnovers. They're not giving targets to the main guys on this offense. They're not running the ball with Ramondre Stevenson. There's just no consistency with the offense. And now that Kendrick Bourne is injured, I would love to go back to Hunter Henry and say, hey, some of those targets may be going his way again. But it's really hard to trust anything with New England right now. So this is going to have to be one of those wait and see weeks. Now, if you need to pick a tight end from this team, I would go with Hunter Henry over Mike Gesicki because he continues to be the better of the 2 options. But when I talk about him being the better of the 2 options, what I really mean is like Mike Gesicki is the frozen food that you would find at your local Dollar General, and Hunter Henry is like gas station sushi. Nobody wins when you pick either of them. If you have to start Cole Kmet this week, good luck to you. I wish you all of the best. It's like jumping out of an airplane and the guy didn't tell you whether or not there was going to be a parachute in your backpack. Because everything could turn out fine and you could land safely on the ground because like last week, Tyson Bagent may have to get the ball out quickly, and getting the ball out quickly could lead to a lot of targets for Cole Kmet. 10 targets last week, caught all of them, only for 79 yards, so there wasn't a ton of upside with 10 targets, but that's okay. You landed safely on the ground. Or it could be like 2 weeks ago when Cole Kmet saw 0 targets. It's like pulling your parachute, nothing coming out, and realizing, oh, I done screwed up. Now, if Cole Kmet can get 8 targets this week, I think his floor is well above a lot of the other people that we would talk about in this video. So if you own Cole Kmet, you're probably needing to run him out there once again. There's not a lot of better options for you this week. Just know it's not going to be fun watching the game. All right, let's sit down for our weekly heart-to-heart on Taysom Hill. And let me try to reiterate once again why you do or do not play Taysom Hill. His ceiling every single week is one of the highest of the tight ends that are currently available to us. Now, you're not starting him over the main top guys, but you get infatuated with him because he has a huge game like he did last week, and all of a sudden you're like, hey, there's nobody else that has as much upside as Taysom Hill, so let's go ahead and play him. But you ignore all the times that he hurt your team. Now, over the last couple of weeks, I've talked about Taysom Hill in a much different light because he was actually getting work in the passing game. Taysom Hill was getting targets and having receptions, but that was with no Juwan Johnson. And then as soon as Juwan Johnson came back, he's not getting any looks in the passing game. And that is what helps give Taysom Hill a higher floor. Because if he's giving you 5 to 8 targets the way he did in week 6 and 7, then he's catching 5, 6, 7 of those targets, and he's giving you a really safe floor because he's getting the points for those yards and those receptions in half PPR or full PPR leagues. But if he's not getting those catches and he's only getting 5, 6, 7 rushing attempts per game, then at that point, you're hoping for like at least 40 rushing yards, because if not, he's scoring under 4 fantasy points and losing your week. So that's why Taysom Hill is such a risky start. You get super excited because he scores touchdowns and he shows you this high upside like you've seen the last 2 weeks, but then he doesn't get those rushing touchdowns and he only gets you a few points. Over the last 2 seasons, since Taysom Hill was given the tight end designation on most fantasy platforms, he's actually lost your fantasy weeks if you started him at the tight end position more than 90% of the time. I'm not making that up. Those are true numbers. I'm trying to be realistic with you all. If you want to start Taysom Hill, go for it. Because of what he's done over the last couple of weeks on the ground, we'll probably still list him as an okay start this week. But just keep in mind, if he doesn't score a rushing touchdown, you're going to be smacking yourself in the face. Unfortunately, there's not a lot to talk about here with Indy and Carolina. Kylen Granson unfortunately has missed the last 2 weeks, but he still leads the tight ends right now in targets and receiving yards. So if he were to come back, he would be the #1 tight end on the team. But until we see more consistent effort from him and the other guys around him, it's really no sense in trying to flip a coin on any Indianapolis tight end, regardless of the matchup. Hayden Hurst had a great first week of the season and looked like he was well primed to be one of the breakout tight ends of 2023 and a big under-the-radar sleeper pick. And then the next 7 weeks happened, and he hasn't done anything since then. Hayden Hurst finished as the tight end 94 last week, and his highest finish that he's had since week 1 was tight end 24. So even though this is a good matchup against the Colts, if you're willing to risk it with Hayden Hurst this week, go right ahead. But there has been nothing to show that it is even realistically worth it. For the Giants and the Raiders, Darren Waller's dealing with a hamstring injury once again. And if we needed him in any week, this would have been the week that we needed him. And unfortunately, not looking too good for him. And not only that, but we don't even know who the starting quarterback is going to be at this point. So yeah, Darren Waller, super risky. I wouldn't even worry about trying to start him this week at this point. And then for Michael Mayer, I mean, what else can we say other than the fact that head coach is gone, offensive coordinator is gone, GM is gone, new starting quarterback, and Michael Mayer, after having basically double his season production on one drive 3 weeks ago, has completely disappeared once again. So at this point, I don't even know what to expect from the Raiders this week. So if I were you, I would definitely take a shot at an option outside of Michael Mayer. Dallas and Philadelphia is going to bring my Manscaped must-watch matchup of the week. Head on over to manscaped.com. It is November, which means it is officially No Shave November. And if you're planning on growing out that luscious beard this month, make sure you get all of the great beard products that Manscaped now has on their website, but use code word headliners when you check out, and you're going to get 20% off your entire order and free shipping. And for Dallas, it was really good to see Jake Ferguson find the end zone last week. But his targets still are not where I want them to be. A few weeks ago, he was looking at getting 7 targets per game. And since then, they have just continued to drop. And coming out of the bye, I was really hoping that they would have found a way to work Ferguson into the game plan a little bit better last week. So really, Jake Ferguson brings the risk reward of touchdown value at this point. When they get to the red zone, it does feel like they are trying to look towards Jake Ferguson a little bit more often. And if that happens, that's great because it gives us higher touchdown upside. But until we start seeing more than 4 or 5 targets a game for Jake Ferguson, he's really not going to have a great floor. For Dallas Goedert, targets to begin the season were really not that big of an issue. After 1 target in week 1, he saw 7 targets each in weeks 2 and 3. But his yards per reception on those targets was barely 5 yards. But now over the last several weeks, maybe the targets have just bumped a little bit over 7, but his yards per reception are over 10 now. We're starting to see more of that big playability from Dallas Goedert that we just didn't see at the beginning of the year. As long as he keeps getting the targets, and as long as he keeps getting some of those big plays, even if he doesn't score, he's giving us some pretty decent upside right now. But given how many targets per game he still does see as kind of the number 2 option for Jalen Hurts, he's got a much safer floor than a lot of tight ends right now. We're finally seeing a really nice breakout from Dalton Kincaid, finishing as the tight end 7 each of the last 2 weeks after Dawson Knox injured his wrist. And because he's had to have surgery on it, Dalton Kincaid has an opportunity to be a top 12 tight end the rest of the season. The targets are there, the receiving yards are there, and this week he gets the defense that allows the second most fantasy points to the tight end position. So if you've been stashing Dalton Kincaid, you absolutely have a smash spot this week in a game where he could finish as a top 5 tight end. For the Chargers and the Jets, Gerald Everett is the guy that I'm keying on in this matchup. If he's healthy and he's able to go, he's definitely going to provide us with some nice upside this week. The Jets do a really good job of limiting wide receivers, but they haven't been as lucky trying to stop tight ends. So I would not be surprised for Gerald Everett playing in the slot or even in the line this week that he would not see quite a few targets given how tough the outside matchups can be. If Gerald Everett can play, I absolutely would consider him an upside of top 14 tight ends this week. Now, if Gerald Everett cannot play, that's where Donald Parham comes in. So if there's no Gerald Everett this week, Donald Parham would become a top 15 option for me with top 7 upside given his red zone ability. Now the Jets defense is good. The Chargers should be able to get themselves into the red zone a little bit this week, and if they can, Donald Parham would be one of the first guys that Justin Herbert would look to. All right, Headliner Nation, I know this week is not looking good for tight ends, and if you're missing one of your top options, it's going to be tough finding someone on the waivers that you really feel like can give you a good opportunity to win your week. But hopefully this video was able to help you out with a couple of options that if you need to start them, you could still get an opportunity to score a decent amount of points. So hit that like button for me, subscribe if you're new to the channel, and if you're new here or you haven't done it yet, hit the bell notification so anytime we go live or drop a video, you're going to know about it. And in the comment section down below, let me know your sleeper tight end of the week. A guy right now outside the top 12 tight ends that you think could have top 5 potential. Headliner Nation, I'm going to get out of here though. Peace out, stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch you all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.